Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me for another tier list. Today we are going to be taking a look at the discography of The Association. This is a band that I would say is pretty under the radar for a lot of people. It seems pretty common for people to know a few of their big hit songs, but not necessarily know who The Association is or how significant of a contribution they had left to 60s music. And when we're talking bands to emerge out of the mid-60s, they would definitely be in my top 5 favorites, and a band that I think deserves a lot more recognition than they get because they've left behind some truly unique music, and every member of the group that contributed from a songwriting standpoint had some really beautiful and awesome songs that they left behind. And hopefully this video can turn on a couple of new people to this very amazing group with a great discography. So I'm very happy to be covering them for today's episode, and what I'm going to do is go through their 7 studio albums, starting with And Then Along Comes the Association and going up to Waterbeds in Trinidad, and I will score each of them on this tier list, with S being the highest and D being the lowest, and I'll talk a little bit about each album, let you know my thoughts, and we will see where we end up. And please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where you agree and disagree, and how you would rank these 7 albums. I would love to hear your thoughts. Alright, I think that's about it. Let's jump right into it. Okay, starting out, we have their debut studio album from 1966 titled And Then Along Comes the Association, and I will give this one an S. I think this is a great first album that serves as a very good introduction to the very tasteful sensibilities of the Association's sound. Stylistically, it's a bit of a mix within that pop rock, folk rock, and sunshine pop sort of realm, with really great instrumentations, with numerous additional session musicians playing throughout this, and I really love the addition of instruments like the oboe, the vibraphone, and the celeste. They really add this nice additional layer to this already beautiful music, and we have really awesome vocal arrangements and harmonies, which is something that is a staple of the Association's sound, and we hear that all throughout this album in some very tasteful ways. The production on this album is top-notch, taking these beautiful combinations of rich instrumentations and lush vocal parts and mixing it in the most effective way possible. The album is 12 tracks long, with 6 songs on each side, and a little over half of the songs on here are originals, with the remaining tracks being covers, and a few of these originals are being written by Jules Alexander, and then a couple are by Terry Kirkman, as well as one by Ted Blue Shell, and Jim Yester also contributes on one. And I think this album has a very solid batch of songs. My personal 2 favorites on here would be the 2 singles, which were Along Comes Mary, which was one of the covers, and I also really love Cherish, which is an absolutely beautiful song written by Terry Kirkman with these very pretty vocal harmonies and great instrumental arrangements. That song would definitely make my list of top 10 favorite Association tracks. And a couple of other favorites of mine on here would be Standing Still, Message of Our Love, Changes, and Round Again, which are all songs that happen to be on side 2, and I really think that side 2 is perfect from front to back. Side 1 is very strong as well, but I think once it gets to side 2 and it's almost entirely originals, I think that's really where a lot of the magic starts to happen on this record. And the only song that I would say I'm not crazy about on here is Blistered. That's the one song that's never really resonated with me for whatever reason, but other than that, I enjoy every other song on this album very much, and I think for a debut album, it contains all of the elements that everyone loves within the Association's sound and does a great job of showcasing their very unique songwriting sensibilities, which sets up a great framework for them to continue to build off of and expand on in their future albums. So a very good first release. This one gets an S. Okay, next we have their second studio album from 1966 titled Renaissance, and I will also give this one an S. Another very good album. I would say I probably like it the slightest bit less than their debut album, but certainly not anything significant, and I think it's still very high quality and deserving of being in the top tier. Stylistically, they do a continuation of a lot of the stuff that they had established on their first record, while also introducing a little bit of psychedelic elements on some select tracks. And another thing that I really enjoy about this album is the fact that it's all originals and no covers, and we're getting contributions and collaborations from a lot of different members of the band at this point. So we're getting more of a feel for each of their compositional styles and how they work individually and collectively. And as far as instrumentation instrumentation goes, they are all covering the instrumental parts themselves now with no session musicians like we had on the first album, and that is probably one element that I do miss a little bit because I really enjoyed that about the first album. And just like the first album, this one is 12 tracks with 6 songs on each side. And side 1 has some real high points. My particular favorite song from this album is Jim Yester's track Memories of You, an absolutely beautiful song with such a powerful sounding chorus with these incredible vocal harmonies. And I also love Pandora's Golden Heebie-Jeebies, which was one of the singles from this album. And this is one of those songs that takes on some more psychedelic elements and it ventures into some really cool territories that are a little different from what we had heard from the Association up to this point. And the only track that I'm not crazy about on side 1 is Angeline. That one has never really done anything for me, but I do think the remainder of side 1 is awesome with I'm the One, All Is Mine, and Songs in the Wind. And then side 2 delivers some more solid originals, with my favorites being Looking Glass and No Fair at All, which would definitely be my second favorite song from this record. Such a beautiful and peaceful song with incredible vocal work. And for me, Jim Yester's writing is really the high point of this record. I think his tracks are really exceptional. And this track, as well as Memories of You, would also make my top 10 favorite Association song list. And the only track I'm not crazy about on side 2 is the closer, Another Time, Another Place. Again, just another one that has never really resonated with me, and that's my main reason as to why I like this one slightly less than the first album. Just the fact that the first album only had 1 track that I wasn't crazy about, and this one has 2. But I would say these 2 albums are certainly very close in terms of quality, and when it comes to exceptional standout songs, this one certainly has a nice handful of them as well. And I really like the fact that it's all originals, and you're hearing them stretch their sound out a bit more and get some more compositional contributions from different members of the band. And I think this was a great follow-up to the debut album, and it continued to deliver all of the great elements of that beautiful Association sound. So another very good album. This one gets an S. Okay, moving on, we have their third studio album from 1967 titled Insight Out, and I will also give this one an S. Another incredible album, and they've really been on a roll ever since their debut release. This was an interesting time for the band because Jules Alexander actually leaves the band because of burnout, and they bring in Larry Ramos as a replacement. And obviously, Jules contributed some incredible songs to the Association, so it is a shame that we don't get to hear more of him on this record. But regardless of his absence, I still think they managed to put out an incredibly strong release. This album is more on the poppy side with some slight psychedelic elements on select tracks, and it also goes back to having more covers with only 5 originals and 6 covers. And side 1 consists of 6 tracks and has one of the songs that I would say the Association is probably most well known for, which is Windy, which is one of the covers on here, and just an incredibly solid and feel-good pop track that I would say is one of the highlights of this album. My personal favorite from side 1, though, is the P.F. Sloan cover of On a Quiet Night. That is an absolutely beautiful song with a great vocal feature from Jim Yester, and this would probably be my favorite track from this album. And my other favorites from side 1 would be We Love Us and When Love Comes to Me, which are 2 solid originals from Ted Blue Shell and Jim Yester. Side 2 then has 5 more tracks, opening up with the other song that I would say the Association is probably most well known for, which is a cover of the song Never My Love. And this is a very beautiful and relaxing track with really awesome vocal harmonies. My personal favorite track on side 2 is Sometime. I think that song is just so pretty and has a really great vocal contribution from Russ Jaguar. I also love the closing track, Requiem for the Masses, written by Terry Kirkman. A very cool way to wrap up the album with this cathedral reverb over the vocal parts, and a song that just takes some very interesting and unexpected turns and concludes the album on a very tasteful note. So another amazing album, and despite the absence from Jules Alexander, I think they managed to put out a very solid batch of originals and covers and produced an album that I think was a very good contribution to the year 1967. So another great album. This one gets an S. Alright, next we have their 4th studio album from 1968 titled Birthday. And again, I will give this one an S. This album is absolutely incredible, and this one goes down as my favorite Association album. I really think this album is one of the hidden gems of 60s music. Stylistically, it's in that pop and psychedelic sort of realm. I would say this is their most psychedelic album of their discography, and they brought back in session musicians, so we have really massive and full instrumentations that I think make these songs even better and more powerful. This album has 11 songs with 7 originals and 4 covers, and some of these originals were written in collaboration with non-band members as well. Side 1 consists of 5 songs, and every single song on this side I think is incredible. There's a great variety from track to track, some being more poppy, some being more psychedelic, and even throwing in a little bit of a jazzy feel on track 3 titled Like Always. There are 3 songs in particular on side 1 that I think are absolute masterpieces, which would be Rose Petals, Incense, and a Kitten, Everything That Touches You, and Toy Maker. Rose Petals, Incense, and a Kitten would be my favorite song on side 1, and I absolutely love the vocal timbre and harmonies on Toy Maker, and the way it was produced just creates such a powerful effect. Side 2 gives us another 6 tracks, again with so much great variety from song to song, and the opening track on side 2, which is Barefoot Gentleman, is my number 1 favorite Association song. To me, that is one of the most magical sounding songs that they have ever produced. It just brings me into a whole nother world. The instrumentation, the vocal harmonies, the interesting chord changes, just everything about it produces such an otherworldly effect. I absolutely love the chorus when it comes in. I just cannot get enough of this song. And another track on this side that I absolutely love is Time It Is Today, another incredible songwriting contribution from Russ Jaguar. And other high points on side 2 for me would be Time for Living, the bus song, and the closing track, Birthday Morning. But as you can see, I do not have a bad thing to say about this record. Everything about it is amazing. The songwriting is top-notch. The choice of covers is great. The blending of styles throughout makes for a very fun and adventurous listen. The production is rock solid. It's got an awesome psychedelic cover. And of all of the Association albums, this one contains the largest amount of my favorite songs by them. So an absolutely incredible album. My number 1 favorite Association album. This one gets an easy S. Okay, next we have their 5th studio album from 1969 titled The Association, and I'm going to give this one a B. Not a bad album, but I definitely wouldn't say it is as high quality as their first 4 releases. In the later part of the 60s, we saw a shift in their sound as they started incorporating some more country and bluegrass styles on select tracks, but at the same time, they are definitely still retaining a lot of their colorful, art rock, folk rock, and pop rock sort of stuff that we had heard on previous releases. But because of that shift, I don't tend to always resonate with every single song on this album. But like I said, at the same time, there are still some songs on here that are very, very good. And it's also worth noting that this is their first album to feature all 7 members again, as Jules Alexander came back into the group. And this album goes back to being almost all originals, with the exception of just 1 track, which was written by the producer, John Boylan. The album is 12 tracks with 6 on each side, and side 1 opens up on more of a country rock feel with Look at Me, Look at You. Not my favorite choice of an opener stylistically, and like I said before, I don't always tend to resonate with the more country elements that they will start incorporating on certain songs. There are a couple of exceptions here and there that I do enjoy, but this one in particular I don't think is a very intriguing opener that really pulls the listener in. And I find the follow-up track, Yes I Will, to be kind of boring as well. Nothing about it really catches my ear. But then on track 3 we get hit with this absolutely beautiful Jules Alexander ballad titled Love Affair. One of my favorites from this album, an exceptional track, and another one that would make my top 10 Association song list. And after that we have a more spacey, moody, psychedelic track titled The Nest, which I think is another very cool song, but stylistically you can see how different this album is from one track to the next, and because of that it can feel a little bit scattered at times for me. And after that we have one of the country songs that I actually do really enjoy, which is What Were the Words by Jim Yester. And then I find the the closing track, Are You Ready, to be kind of corny and definitely would be my least favorite song from side 1. Side 2 then opens up with 2 more Jules Alexander tracks titled Dubuque Blues and Under Branches, both of which are awesome tracks, and I think Jules Alexander's writing is really what carries this album for me. All of his contributions on here I think are awesome. So I think side 2 opens up very strong, but after those opening 2 tracks, it does start to lose me a little bit with the next 2 songs, which are I Am for Europe and Broccoli. Both songs I find kind of boring and I think do take away from the momentum of the opening 2 tracks, which were very strong. And then we go into 2 more songs that I do think are good, which is Goodbye Forever and the closing track, Boy on the Mountain, which is a nice hard-hitting rock track written by Terry Kirkman and Richard Thompson, which was a nice surprising contribution from this album, and I think it wraps things up very nicely. But in general, I think about half of the songs on here are very good, with a couple being really exceptional, like Love Affair, What Were the Words, and Dubuque Blues. But at the same time, I definitely think it has a couple of skip overs that really don't do much for me and does take away from the momentum that is established with the stronger tracks. And like I said, I'm not always particularly crazy about some of the country choices, but some of them are okay at the same time. But nevertheless, in the midst of these underwhelming tracks, it still has some awesome songs that give us that classic association sound. So an okay album, but not great. I will give this a B. Okay, next we have their 6th studio album from 1971 titled Stop Your Motor, and I will give this a C. I have a lot of similar feelings to this that I did with the previous release, but I would consider this one to be a little bit more of a downgrade. Again, they're incorporating some more country and bluegrass elements throughout it, which I'm not always crazy about, but at the same time, this one still does have a handful of songs that I think are great, and the album is 10 tracks long with 5 songs on each side. It starts out relatively strong with the opening 2 tracks, Bring Yourself Home and Funny Kind of Song. I think those 2 are solid tracks and are actually some of the high points of the album, but I'm definitely not a fan of track 3 titled That's Racin'. This is basically a straight up country song, and for me veers into a style that I just don't resonate with very much, and I don't find the closing track of side 1 particularly exciting either, which is Silver Morning. I think the song P.F. Sloan is okay, but I wouldn't say that I love it. So side 1 is weird because it has the 2 openers that I like, 2 that I really don't care for, and 1 that I think is only okay. For side 2, we have another 5 tracks, and again, I do enjoy the opener, which is It's Gotta Be Real. That song grooves really hard and has some beautiful vocal harmonies, and I like the follow-up song as well, which is The First Round, a very pretty and mysterious mood that it gives off. And then that is followed by the single from this album, Along the Way, which is an absolutely beautiful piano ballad and would be my favorite song from this album. But I'm not particularly crazy about the follow-up song, Traveler's Guide, a Brian Cole song that I just don't find very exciting. And the closing track, Seven Virgins, is okay, but I wouldn't say it's a favorite of mine. Vocally, I can definitely appreciate what's going on, and it does have little sections here and there that I find pretty interesting, but as an overall song, I don't tend to resonate with every single section of it. But not a terrible closing track, but certainly not one of the better closing tracks of any of their albums. So it's got a few songs that I enjoy, particularly the first 2 tracks of side 1 and the first 3 tracks of side 2, but other than that, I do find a lot of this album pretty underwhelming, and it doesn't contain as many of those elements of that classic association sound that I love, where I felt like those elements were a little bit more present on the previous release. And I do think the strong songs on the previous release are better than the strong songs on this album as well, which is why I gave this one a C and that one a B. But nevertheless, still a couple of enjoyable songs, but largely I don't consider this album to be super strong, and I don't find myself going back to any of these songs very often. So not a great album, in my opinion. This will get a C. Okay, next we have their 7th and final studio album from 1972 titled Waterbeds in Trinidad, and I will give this one a B. This is an interesting album because there's definitely a chunk of it that I really enjoy, and I do like it a little bit more than Stop Your Motor, but again, at the same time, I wouldn't say any of the tracks on here would go down as any of my favorite association songs, and there are definitely a couple of tracks that I find pretty underwhelming and don't resonate with very much, and in general, I think if you're a fan of the first 4 association albums and, really resonate with that sound of them, there is a likelihood that the 3 albums that follow it aren't going to, be as exciting to you. And that's largely how I feel about the later part of their discography. There tends to be a handful of songs on these albums that I really like, and then there's a handful of tracks that I'm just not crazy about. But I do think when the songs are good, they are so good that they do largely carry a lot of the album, and that's generally how I feel about this one and why I put it in B tier. I do think the quality in the good songs is higher on this one than it is on Stop Your Motor. For side 1, my 2 favorites are the cover of The Lovin' Spoonful's Darling, Be Home Soon, and Terry Kirkman's Come the Fall. And I think Silent Song Through the Land is a pretty good song too. Midnight Wind and Kicking the Gong Around really don't do anything for me, but I wouldn't say they're terrible songs either. I'm kind of indifferent about them. For side 2, I do think it gets a little bit stronger, but also has a couple of tracks I'm not super into. It starts out incredibly strong with Rainbows Bent and Snow Queen, and then I'm not too crazy about the 2 songs that follow it with Indian Wells Woman and Please Don't Go. I do, however, absolutely love the closing track, which is Little Road and A Stone to Roll. Just a really solid 70s rock track that I think is about as good of a closer as you can ask for the final album of this group, and I would say it might even be one of my favorite closing tracks of any Association album, believe it or not. So definitely an interesting album because, like I said, I don't like every single song on here, and I don't always resonate with the stylistic and compositional choices with about 4 of the tracks on here, but I do think the other ones are very nice, and there are a couple of hidden gems scattered throughout this with tracks like Come the Fall, Rainbows Bent, Snow Queen, and Little Road and A Stone to Roll. So definitely not a perfect album, but an album that still delivers some really great tracks and nice final contributions from the lineup at that time. So I would say a little bit of an upgrade from Stop Your Motor, but still not an amazing album. I would say it's okay. This one gets a B. All right, we did it. We went through their 7 studio albums, and this is what I came up with. I had pretty confident thoughts going into this as to how I was going to rank the first 4 albums because I absolutely love all of them, but the 5th, 6th, and 7th album did take a couple of listens to really solidify my thoughts, but after spending some more time with those records, I can definitely say that this is an accurate scoring of how I feel about them, and even though I'm not as crazy about the later part of their discography, I still think there are a lot of really great individual tracks on each of these albums that are well worth checking out. And depending on what stylistic preferences you have as a listener, you might actually really enjoy those albums. There's definitely a whole group of people that really like those albums as well. So, obviously I'm just one person and this is my opinion and it is not the same as everyone else's. So I would highly recommend checking out this entire discography if you haven't done so yet, because there are some real gems all throughout this 7 album discography. And like I said at the beginning, I think they are one of the most underappreciated bands of the 60s and deserve a lot more recognition for their amazing contributions to music. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope it was enjoyable, and if you are interested, please feel free to check out some of my other tier lists linked in the comments and the descriptions and see if there's anything else that you might like. And I also have a new series I've been putting out every 2 weeks where I take you through my top 5 favorite albums from every year. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check that out as well. And like I said, please feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, where you agree and disagree and how you would rank these 7 albums. I would love to hear your thoughts. All right, that's it for today. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you at the next video. Take care.